Good morning. We are here today to discuss Parshas VaYeira, and the title for today's class is HaShem, the Marriage Counselor. This month, the month of Cheshvan, is sponsored by David and Sarah Shokron and family for the merit of continuing success for Klal Yisrael to fulfill its mission to bring light and wisdom to the entire world. This week's class is dedicated in honor of the birth of a baby girl to Avigdor and Leah Chicheportiche. MAZAL TOV to the entire Mishpacha. This comes on the heels of the earlier month being sponsored by the Chicheportiche family as a whole. So we live in a world where there's so much going on, and recently we've been talking about many important global issues. Of course, yesterday was election day. Many people disturbed about the results. Many people in our community, I should say, disturbed about the results in various elections, not the least of which is New York City. And I do not plan on talking about that today. I do want to draw our attention to the fact that in the first three Parshios of the Torah, we're talking about very big things. For example, the creation of the world. For example, the kicking of Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden. For example, the Tower of Babel and the flood. And even in last week's Parsha, Parshas Lech Lecha, we talk about the war between the 4 kings and the 5 kings. We talk about the new promise that HaShem says to Abraham that you will be a great nation. We're talking about very large events in the context of the entire history of the world. We come to this week's Parsha, and we talk about a story of 3 guests, men that the Chachamim say are angels visiting Avraham Avinu. And even though we also later talk about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, which is a relatively large event, it does not really seem that now that we're finally dealing with the person whom HaShem has declared a promise of a great nation, plus a covenantal relationship of circumcision for posterity, it does not seem that we would be talking about small things. But the first thing, according to the Chachamim, that the rabbis are telling us is that HaShem appears to Avraham as a person who would visit a sick person. That's very nice. Don't get me wrong, it's beautiful, but doesn't really seem to be grand in scale. Or, for example, what the rabbis say, that Hashem says to Avraham, listen, you sit and I'll stand. You sit, I'll stand. Also very nice, but what's the point? And then we have a very particular conversation that's mentioned. The guests are invited in. Avraham tells Sarah to prepare cake or breads. She does so. She never serves them, which we're going to come back to. Avraham prepares beef. So we're talking about like the minutia of bringing in a guest and how you treat them, and they ate. And then we have this conversation where Sarah, and she's in the tent, and the angel says, looking like a guest according to Rashi, I will return to you at this time next year. There will be a child to Sarah, your wife, and Sarah is listening. And Avram and Sarah are old, and in fact, coming along in years, and Sarah has stopped having the way of women, meaning she's no longer ovulating, menstruating. And Sarah laughs or scoffs when she hears this statement by the angel, hey, look, you're going to have a son, or Sarah's going to have a son. And she says, after I'm worn out, I can be rejuvenated, my master is old. And Hashem says to Abraham, why is this that Sarah is laughing, scoffing, saying, is it true that I'm really going to give birth? I'm too old. Is anything beyond Hashem? In a year, I'm going to come back and Sarah's going to have a child. And the Torah concludes with, and Sarah denied, saying, no, I did not laugh, because she was apparently afraid to admit that she laughed. And Avram says, no, you did laugh. A fascinating end of a conversation. And we don't find any more discussion after that between Avraham and Sarah. So it's kind of like we're dealing with these humongous global issues from the beginning of creation through the end of last week's Parsha. Now we're getting to the very nitty-gritty of inviting in guests and a conversation between Abraham and Sarah. So there are many questions on the story, but that's just like for context, presenting it that way. Well, now let's talk about some of the very difficult points of the story. Dr. Finkelstein actually asked me 2 questions this week that we're going to talk about as well. Very difficult questions. So as we do these questions, I'm going to share those questions with you as well. Now, I mentioned, and we'll just call this question number 1, that according to the Chachamim, because the Torah does not say a conversation that happens when Hashem visits Avraham, the Chachamim are presuming there's another reason that Hashem is visiting Avraham, which is on the heels of his circumcision, which is the immediate prior paragraph. And therefore, Hashem is coming to visit Avraham, especially it only uses a pronoun for Avraham, like the same Avraham, this is when the father learns, the same Avraham that we're talking about in the last Parsha that got circumcised. It's to that Avraham of circumcision that Hashem is appearing to here, and therefore Hashem came to visit Avraham when he was not well because of his surgery of the circumcision. So why does, in fact, Hashem say to Avraham, look, you sit and I'll stand? And this, by the way, is supposed to portend that in the future, when the Jewish people are in judgment and they're adjudicating law, in the courts, Hashem stands when the Jewish people are adjudicating law. And the fact that Hashem is standing here now when Avraham is not adjudicating law, so that's interesting. But somehow it's connected because Hashem stands here and Avraham sits, so too in the future Hashem will stand in the courthouses when the judges are sitting and judging. What's the connection in these two events? But also, Hashem sits or stands? What does that mean? Like, does Avraham see Hashem standing? Like, what does it mean for Hashem to be standing? Hashem just is, and Hashem somehow communicates. What does it mean for Hashem to be standing? Question number 2 is that Rashi tells us, and so this is a question specifically on Rashi, especially the way he reads the sentences, that Avraham then, while he's having this interaction with Hashem, Avraham lifts up his eyes, he sees that there are 3 men standing over him, he runs to greet them, and according to everyone, even though Hashem is visiting, Avram runs out to greet these angels. When I say everyone, I'm not talking about the famous Rambam that says that this was a prophecy, subject for another time. I think even according to that Rambam, there's a lot to discuss. My brother Zachari was talking about it this week, that this actually happened as well. Anyways, he ran out to greet them and he said, Hashem, please do not go away. And Rashi, it says that he said to Hashem to wait for him until he runs to greet the guests. It's not just that Avraham ran to greet the guests, or it's not just that Avraham said, excuse me, Hashem, I got to go take care of the guests. He said, wait. Hashem, you stay here, stay, until I greet the guests. How can he have the audacity to do such a thing? Even though the Gemara says that from here we learn it's greater to receive guests than to receive the countenance of the divine presence, because clearly Avraham is walking out on the opportunity of a continuing interaction with Hashem in order to take care of guests. Okay, you want to say it's more important? Okay, but then you also say it's appropriate to say to Hashem, wait. I think Hashem is a free agent. Why should he wait? And what does it mean to wait? The whole thing is astonishing. So that's question number 2. Question number 3, and this is one of Dr. Finkelstein's questions. Question number 3, it says that Avraham told Sarah to prepare these breads, and presumably she did so. And then it says Avraham ran to go get the cattle and prepare it with the lad that was with him. And then when Avraham serves, it says that he took out cream and milk and the animal that he prepared to give to them, and he stood over the guests and they ate. So the rabbis ask, where's the bread? What happened to the bread? He never serves the bread that he goes to ask his wife to make. Now, I don't know about in your home, but like that would be a no-no. I ask my wife to make food and then I don't serve it for the guests. That's pretty bad. So the rabbis say, oh, you know what happened? Sarah did prepare these breads, but she started menstruating. She became a nida, which is ritually unclean. That's considered tameh. It made the bread, the dough, tameh, and therefore could not be served. Now that brings up a whole host of other questions, that they were observing that law, that they can't serve that kind of bread to guests that they think are Arabs. That's also interesting. But the bottom line is they weren't going to serve the bread because she became a nida. So ask Dr. Finkelstein, she became a nida, and then she hears she's going to have a baby, right? So she started menstruating. Then she hears that she's going to have a baby, and she still scoffs. Why is she so disbelieving? She just resumed the way of women which she literally just said, I'm old and how can I be rejuvenated? And it literally just started happening to her that very day. So why is she having such difficulty and scoffing? Now, I would add to that question, that's a great question that Dr. Finkelstein asked me, but I would add to that question that let's just think for a moment. In those days, it's true that they started giving birth probably earlier, like 30s or 40s, maybe even later. Okay, fine. Now, 14 years earlier, or let's even say 15 years earlier, Avraham gives birth to a son by the name of Yishmael, because Avraham at this point is 100 years old, and at age 86 is when the Torah says that Yishmael is born. And we know that Sarah is 10 years younger than Avraham. And at that time, that Sarah proffers Hagar to Avraham. This we learned in last week's Parsha, right? Sarah is the one that suggests, Hagar, you marry Avraham. And Avraham marries Hagar and has a son. At that very same moment when Sarah is giving Hagar to Avraham, she says, maybe when I give her to you, I will merit to give birth. Perhaps I will be able to build from her. So just a mere 15, 14 years earlier, Sarah is saying, hey, maybe I can give birth too. So I get it. It is, 15 years later, but also lived significantly longer at that time. Sarah lived until age 127, and that seems that she died early, in fact. Abraham lives until age 180. So what's so astonishing to Sarah that she should scoff when she's being told, hey, look, you're going to have a son, when she just started menstruating? And just 15 years earlier, she was planning to have a son or children. Not to mention that, if you play the lottery every week, if you get a prophecy, after 50 years of playing, hey, you're going to win this week, I don't think you're going to scoff. You're going to be like, yeah, finally. She's probably been waiting for this her whole life, right? Why not be a little open to the idea, And not only that, she doubles down when Hashem tells Abraham and Abraham tells Sarah, you laughed, and Sarah says, no, I didn't. Why go through all that? Like, what is that all about? So that's basically question number 3 is how could Sarah scoff by declaring that she was incapable of rejuvenation when at age 90, she was menstruating that very day, and especially in the context of what she did when she was 76, when she says, behold, I will build from her, when she gives Hagar to Abraham. Now, another major question is that in Parshas Lech Lecha, Hashem tells Abraham that Sarah is going to give birth to you a son, and his name is going to be Yitzchak. And initially, Avram says, oh, how I wish Yishmael would live in front of you. First, Hashem doesn't say the name Yitzchak. First, Hashem says, Sarah is going to give birth to you a son. And Avram says, oh, how I wish Yishmael should live in front of you, meaning Rashi says he should serve you. In other words, he should be a successful servant of Hashem. And Hashem says, okay, Yishmael will be great, but Sarah will give birth to you a child, and his name will be Yitzchak. That's what Hashem tells Avraham very, very clearly. Avraham laughs in celebration, as opposed to this week when Sarah laughs in terms of scoffing. Okay, so Avraham knows very clearly that Sarah is going to give birth to him a son. Is there a reason that Avraham does not share that with Sarah? Really? Get like the best news in the world, and you're not sharing it with Sarah? What is that about? How could it be? One would think, us men are notorious for not sharing. Can you imagine that? I could imagine Sarah saying, how could you never tell me? And that conversation not going very well either, right? What is that about? And if you would have told her, you would think she's definitely not scoffing in this week's Parsha. So how does Abraham do that? And why should it even be necessary to send an angel to tell Sarah? Abraham knows. Another question, and then we're going to ask 2 more questions, one more, and then the last one will be the second question of Dr. Finkelstein's. And this question was asked to me a couple of years ago, and it's a great question, I think. I don't remember the name of the person who asked me, so I apologize for not quoting it, but it's a great question. Rashi tells us that Hashem says to Avraham, why did Sarah laugh? That's what Hashem says to Avraham. Why did Sarah laugh? Is anything beyond Hashem? Of course not. And the words that Hashem says is, why did Sarah laugh, saying, it's true that I'm going to give birth when I'm so old? That's what Hashem says to Avram. So Rashi points out, she didn't actually say only that she's so old. She said that she's worn out. And she said her husband is so old. She said, my master, referring to Avraham, is so old. But Hashem conveniently leaves that out, right? Hashem doesn't mention the fact that Sarah said that Avraham is old. So Rashi says, well, the implication is that that Sarah did not say anything negative about Avraham, and that's kind of like lying, right? By Hashem saying that all Sarah said is that I, Sarah, am too old, sounds like she didn't say anything negative about Avraham. So Rashi says, yeah, Avraham lied. Hashem lied. Hashem didn't say the truth because of shalom, because of harmony. Hashem is not a marriage wrecker. Hashem doesn't want to say, your wife thinks you're old. Well, that's all fine and dandy, but tell me how Hashem is not a marriage wrecker by telling Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? Abraham doesn't know that Sarah laughed. The Torah is very clear that she seems to be laughing to herself. So why is Hashem ratting out Sarah to the husband? How is that not going to create a shalom bayis problem? And at the same time, we're saying, oh, but don't worry, Hashem didn't say the part that Abraham is old. All he said is that Sarah really lacks emunah to Avraham Avinu. I don't think that goes over very well in the marriage. So how could Hashem do that to the marriage of Abraham and Sarah to tell Abraham that Sarah laughed? Hashem has plenty of ways to rebuke Sarah and to get her a message. Hashem had 7 or so angels go give Hagar various messages. Hashem can send an angel to Sarah, hey, why did you laugh? Don't you know, nothing is beyond Hashem. Just the fact that Hashem is involving Avraham in this part of the whole chastisement of Sarah seems very, very, very difficult. Especially we see that Hashem is keen on their shalom by lying about not giving up the fact that Sarah actually did say that Avraham is old. And then the final question, which is Dr. Finkelstein's second question. At the very end, it says that the men got up from there and Avraham accompanied them. Avraham went with them to send them, which Rashi says he was accompanying them like we do the mitzvah of levaya, the mitzvah of accompaniment. When a guest leaves, you accompany them. Says Rashi, he thought that they were guests. Now, Dr. Finkelstein's translation that he sent me is he thought they were travelers. I think travelers is a bad definition. The word is orchim. Orchim means guests. Travelers would probably be a different word. So the point is, Dr. Finkelstein says, after all this, Avram thinks they're just guests? Really? Not only does the angel say, in a year, I'm going to come, right? Not only in a year does the angel say, I'm going to come, but Hashem says, why did Sarah scoff? Obviously, Hashem expected that Avram and Sarah are taking this as a real message. And Avram just thinks they're guests. What does that even mean? So I would like to answer all the 6 questions. First, we'll just repeat. Why does Hashem tell Avram to sit and that Hashem would stand? Why is it important to know that in the future that's the way it's going to be? When the people judge and Hashem stands in the courts, then what does it mean for Hashem to stand? Question number 2, how could Avraham have the audacity to ask Hashem to wait for him while he runs to take care of the guest? Bad enough that he's running out on Hashem, but he then says, okay, Hashem, you stay here, you wait, stay, and I'll come back. Question number 3, how could Sarah scoff? Why would she scoff? She just started menstruating, and 15 years earlier, she's planning on having children, and it's something that she's been pining for. What's so hard to accept? Not to mention, she knows that in general, Hashem promised children to Avram. Okay, maybe it's not her, but maybe it is her. Question number 4 is Hashem tells Avram very clearly, Sarai, don't call her name Sarah, and she's going to have for you children. And he says, oh, I wish she smelled, but then Hashem verifies, no, Sarah is going to give birth to you a son, and his name is Yitzchak. Why doesn't he even tell that to Sarah? And if he did, why is she scoffing? And then question number 5 is, how is Hashem creating a shalom bayis problem by telling on Sarah that she scoffed when she heard this news of having a child? And number 6, what does it mean that Rashi says that Abraham accompanies them because he thinks they're guests? So I would like to suggest that we need to start at the beginning. What is it that Sarah finds it so hard to believe? And why, in fact, does Abraham not tell Sarah that Hashem said to Abraham that she's going to have a child? Now, I'm not going to pretend that this is fully clarified to me either, but I think it's a very important beginning. And then from there, more can hopefully be understood by any of us more or later or in the future. But the basic concept that I would like to suggest is that, first of all, it's fascinating that it's Sarah's idea that Abraham marry Hagar. It's not Abraham's idea, it's Sarah's idea, which tells you that Sarah herself is questioning if she is the one that's meant to give birth to children for Abraham, because she profits her maidservant. And clearly that doesn't go so well either, because Hagar makes light of her, and Sarah rebukes her, and then there's animosity created, and that is a whole story in itself. But the beginning of everything in this relationship issue with Sarah and Abraham is that Sarah does suggest that Abraham marry Hagar, and then she thinks that perhaps in the merit of that, she can have more children, or she can have children at one point, but clearly Sarah thinks it's not her merit now to have children from Abraham. So the therefore that I'm suggesting is that a major problem in their marriage relationship is that Abraham, to our knowledge, never disabuses Sarah of the notion that maybe she's not the one that's meant to have children from Abraham. And what I mean by that is not that Abraham should know with a guarantee that it's going to happen before Hashem tells him, but it should be that Abraham is able to convey to her that there's every reason in the world that the child that Hashem promises him to issue from him should in fact come from Sarah. She is his wife. She is a world changer. She was teaching and converting women. She is always with Abraham in all of his trials and tribulations, including hiding in a box and being taken captive. And by the way, let's also remember, I think it's just important to note, that even after this claim of Sarah that she's too old in our story, at age 90, she's kidnapped by Avimelech because of her beauty. Just bear that in mind as well. Okay, she's literally the object of everybody's desire still. So the fact that she herself doesn't think that she's capable of having children is indicative of her own self-doubt. And Abraham does not challenge that self-doubt, nor does he build confidence in her. And the ultimate proof is that when Hashem says to Abraham, you're going to have a son from Sarah, what does Abraham say? I wish Ishmael would be successful and be able to serve you. Excuse me? Obviously, Abraham thinks that Ishmael is great, but he also is not saying, and it's wonderful that I'm also going to have a child from Sarah. You want Ishmael to be successful? Great, but say, and also Sarah should have this wonderful son. But he doesn't say that. So on some level, the fact that the union of Sarah and Abraham did not produce a child heretofore led Abraham and Sarah to believe that their match was not made for the next generation being born. That's where the mindset was. Then Hashem appears to Avram, as we just mentioned, and says, no, Ishmael will be great, but guess what? Sarah will have a son for you. So why does he not share that news with Sarah? Because it's a very delicate subject. Because the truth is that they had both adopted the mindset that they're not going to have a child together. And by the way, the Ramban says ideas like this over here and in other places, that when the parents themselves, let me say it differently. The Ramban says that sometimes certain couples, the match can't produce children, but in other matches, they can produce children. So they were of the opinion that their particular union would not produce offspring because they had davened and they had tried, and there was every reason to believe, but it never happened. And Yishmael immediately is born from Hagar. So therefore, in their minds, this wasn't meant to happen. But then Hashem does appear to Avram and say, but Sarah will have a son for you. So why doesn't he tell Sarah? So it's not only that it's a delicate subject and that Abraham is afraid to convey it, because, what if it doesn't work out, even though Hashem said so, but maybe it's going to mean something different and maybe he doesn't want to get involved. I don't think that's the reason. I think the reason is because Hashem doesn't tell Abraham to tell Sarah. Because in life, very often, even though good things are going to happen, they really only happen when we evolve and transform into the person that's ready for them to happen. And what Hashem was telling Abraham, look, your name is Abraham because you're going to be circumcised. It's no longer Avram. Her name is Sarah because she will have a son. But heretofore, she has not yet developed into that person that's capable of producing the Yitzchak. So Hashem tells Avram to circumcise. So Avram knows what his transformation is. He has to circumcise. But he presumes that Sarah's transformation is going to come now that Abraham is circumcised in their union, in the way, for example, that they take care of guests together, the way that they now will live life together on a new and higher plane because of Abraham's circumcision. That's what Abraham presumes. So therefore, he never tells Sarah, because what he wants is for Sarah to transform on her own, and he wants Sarah to be capable of giving birth to the Yitzchak according to her abilities, according to her own transformation. And by the way, a sort of a proof that Yitzchak is born out of the new transformation of Avraham and Sarah is that one explanation in Parshas Lech Lecha why Yitzchak is called Yitzchak is because Avraham laughed, meaning joyfully laughed. The other explanation is because Yud stands for the 10 tests that Hashem gave to Avram. Tzadi stands for the age that Sarah is 90 years old. Ches stands for the 8 days of circumcision that they will then circumcise Yitzchak when he's 8 days old, which will be the first one. And Kuf stands for the fact that Abraham is 100. Now, isn't that a bizarre reason to name your child? Because of 10 tests, age 90, 8 days old, and 100 years old. Really? That's why you call your son Yitzchak? That's a whole other explanation. The answer is yes, because those ages and those days and those tests represent the evolution that Abraham and Sarah needed to undergo in order to be able to give birth to a Yitzchak that will ultimately be the next father of the Jewish people. And so Abraham is thinking, okay, this is for Sarah to change. Very good. So what happens? Hashem appears to Abraham, and Abraham wants to get up and serve the guests. And Hashem says, listen, you now are a partner with me. You just got circumcised. Part of what a partner does is stand and be available and be behind the activity and the work of the other person. Now you're looking for guests. I'm here. I'm standing. I'm visiting you. I'm here to care for you. Now is not your time to show me respect. Now we're living as partners, and part of what partners do is they're available and stand behind and wait and support their partner. So Hashem says, I'm standing and you sit, and guess what? It's going to be that way in the future also. When the Jews are implementing Din, which is bringing Hashem's kingdom into the world, the Jews are doing the work of the adjudicating. Hashem says, I'm here while you do your work. We're partners in this process, which the Sanhedrin sat in a room, which was half holy and half regular, to indicate this partnership between Hashem and man. So, good. That's what Hashem tells Avram. And then the guests come. Now, the reason my father so brilliantly explains that it's greater to receive guests than to actually sit in a conversation and interaction with Hashem is because the greatest form of connection is not the conversation, it's becoming like the other person. And taking care of guests is what Hashem does. Hashem does chesed. And if I do chesed, and I do chesed in the right way, I become that much more connected to Hashem. That's a greater connection. It's not that the rabbis are saying it's more important to do chesed than to talk to Hashem. The rabbis are saying that's a greater way to interact with Hashem. That's a greater achievement of connection with Hashem. And so Avram says to Hashem, listen, you're telling me that you're partners, right? We're in this together, and we're having this incredible experience that you're appearing to me. And I really could stand, which is a chiddush also. Rashi alludes to Parshas Lech Lecha. Before, Avram couldn't handle standing when Hashem appeared to him, but now that he was circumcised, he could handle it. But you were telling me to sit because we're really partners. I'm going to be on so much of a higher level after I do chesed. Let's wait for our interaction until after I do the chesed, because then it's going to be an even higher experience because I'll be more like you. He's not saying, Hashem, wait, you got to wait for me until I come back. He's saying, wait for me to evolve further. Hashem does. He's saying, wait while I go take care of the guests, because then I'm going to be even on a higher plane of existence. And he does. And he runs to go do the chesed, and he does it so beautifully, and he runs to the tent to tell Sarah, hurry, make bread, and she does. And then the cattle, and she does. And then they say, where's Sarah? And she's behind the tent, and they say, in a year, Sarah's going to have a son. So what happens? Sarah scoffs, she disbelieves. We pointed out that at 76, she thought she could have children. We pointed out that she was menstruating, and it's true, as somebody posted here in the chat, just because a woman does have blood does not mean necessarily that they are capable now of having children, even if it's at an advanced age. But still, why wasn't she more open to the possibility? That's why Hashem is ratting out Sarah to Abraham. Hashem is telling Abraham the fact that Sarah is not believing that she will have a child. It's not because she doesn't believe in miracles. It's because she doesn't think herself worthy to have the child, because she didn't get that feeling and vote of confidence from you that she's worthy to have that child. You're sitting around and you're saying, Sarah has to do her work. I'm not going to tell her she's going to have a child. Let's see what happens. Avraham, that's not the way a partnership works. I came to visit you when you're sick. I'm standing here and waiting while you transform. You need to tell Sarah we're in this transformation endeavor together. And she needs to feel from you how much you want it. Not this Lu Yishmael Yichel Lefanecha business. Not, I hope Yishmael will be successful. You have to go all in with your partner. You have to make them feel like this is the most important thing to you, and that you're with them, and that you have confidence in them, and this is really, really possible. That is Hashem acting as a marriage counselor, because Hashem is not creating a shalom bayis problem. Hashem is saying, you have a shalom bayis problem. That you have a problem. The fact that Sarah doesn't believe in herself enough is also your Abraham's responsibility. And so therefore, Abraham goes to have a conversation with Sarah. And guess what? It doesn't seem so sweet and delicious, right? What happens? He says to Sarah something that we don't know. We actually don't know what Abraham says to Sarah. But the net result is that Sarah says, I didn't laugh. I didn't scoff. And Abraham says, yes, you did. That's all we know from the conversation. But that is so rich and important to understand. The number one thing in a shalom bayis situation is you have to be able to talk about it. And the number two thing is that you have to communicate even if there is ongoing miscommunication. Because really the result of that conversation that should happen is that Sarah should say, Abraham, thank you so much for believing in me. I know this was hard for me, and I so appreciate now that you're coming to me and we're in this together. But that's not what happened. But you know something? They got over it, and I'll prove it to you. Because that day she menstruated, and a year later she gave birth, which means that after this whole interaction, they were intimate, and they did produce a child, and they did produce a Yitzchak. And so what the Torah is telling us is that in order for a marriage that's having issues to continue, they need to be confronted. There needs to be a mutual responsibility where Sarah takes her part that she did scoff, where Avraham takes his part that he did not promote enough to her, his belief in her and her abilities. And then they need to move forward. None of this, they don't communicate, and they can't move forward in the relationship. They're both mad at each other, because after all, if Hashem is coming and saying, hey, Sarah didn't do it, there's a lot that Abraham could resent, a lot. And especially the fact that Sarah denies, which, is unbelievable in itself. But nonetheless, they did move forward because they did, in fact, have a son, which means that they were intimate, and they ultimately did give birth to a Yitzchak, so you know that they did manage to move forward. So now we understand that even though she was menstruating, it was hard for her to accept, and that Abraham has responsibility in that as well. And so a deeper underlying message is not only that HaShem was saying, hey, you have a shalom bias problem, the whole way that HaShem is interacting with Abraham now that he is circumcised is a demonstration of how a marriage is supposed to function. You just inquire about how a person is feeling, especially when they're down. You let them know that you're there for them and that you're partnering with them and they do what they need to do, but you're there, you're waiting, and you're patient. You let them know that you're so proud for them to transform in the ways that they have and in the ways that they will. You let them know that you will definitely be waiting while they evolve, which is what Abraham asks HaShem to do. And you also care about their other partners, right? It's not only that Abraham and HaShem are partners. HaShem says, Abraham, you and Sarah are partners. You have to care about your most important relationships together. And so instead of HaShem not saying anything and just leaving it alone and letting a Yitzchak just miraculously be born without rectifying or working on the shalom bayis, HaShem gets involved. And HaShem says, look, you have a shalom bayis problem. You have work to do, and you can make your relationship so much greater, and therefore Yitzchak can be so much greater. And that's the work you need to do. And therefore Abraham starts to work on that. And then finally, the final message, and this is to answer the second of Dr. Finkelstein's questions, when it says that Abraham accompanied them, he escorted them, and he thought they were guests, it doesn't mean he didn't think that they were a special messenger from HaShem. It does not mean that Abraham and Sarah thought at this point that these were just random, so to speak, passers-by, Arabs, or whatever they were. What it means is that Abraham thought that the whole reason why HaShem did this was so that Abraham would have the opportunity to take care of guests and learn all the lessons that we just said, continue to transform himself to be like HaShem, to do chesed, to continue to grow and have HaShem wait for him, to use it as also a way to work on the shalom bayis problem. He thought that that was the whole reason that they came, was for Abraham and Sarah to take care of them as guests. But that's not true, because they were actually on a mission from there to Sodom, to destroy Sodom. So the immediate next sentence, after it says that Abraham accompanied them, Hashem said, am I going to hide from Abraham that which I am doing? And he proceeds to tell Abraham that he's going to destroy Sodom, or he's going to judge Sodom. Why? Because he knows how important Abraham is and how he's going to instruct his children after him, which means that until that point, Abraham did not know that that was another function of the guests. And Hashem was telling himself and telling Abraham, you can't hide the big things from your partner. That's what he's saying. He's saying, how could it be that here I am preaching to Abraham about what it means to be a partner and how to be a partner in a marriage, and I'm not going to tell my partner of this major event that's going to happen in his promised land? That's also a no-no in a partnership. Hint, hint, I can't blame Abraham for not telling Sarah that Yitzchak was going to be born if I don't tell Abraham what's going to happen with Sodom and Amorah, or at least what I'm considering doing in Sodom and Amorah. That's why he literally says, am I going to cover from Abraham? He thought they were just guests, not angels en route to go determine the fate of Sodom. And Hashem says, nope, that's the final lesson. In a partnership, it's not only how you're there for them, it's not only how you try to help them evolve, it's not only that you wait for them to evolve, it's not only that you build them up, you also have to make sure to care about their partners and to share the biggest issues that you're dealing with. That's also part of a marriage. And so therefore I say this whole series of sentences is a major lesson in how to work on a marriage, how to be a partner in a covenantal relationship, and how to be a marriage counselor. Because the best marriage counselor is the person that really treats the partnerships the way that a marriage ought to be treated. And that's the ultimate that you would want from anybody that's helping in a marriage, just like over here, what Hashem was doing for Abraham and Sarah. And so ultimately for us, we started with the question, okay, but what about, like the really important things, not just taking care of a few guests and not like a marital spat, like why are we focusing so much on that after we've been dealing with all these huge issues in the world? You want to know why? It's very simple, because the biggest problem with the world is that we don't have enough good people. And the only way to have enough good people is to have covenantal partnerships and marriages that really work at the highest level. That's how you produce the Yitzchaks of the world. That's how you produce the right, good people. And that is a big global issue. And that is what HaShem is dealing here at the opening of the Parsha. Any questions or comments?
Thanks, Akiva. See you next week.
Great.
Arnie, I found a great toothbrush. I have to tell you.
I have a question.
Yes.
So this was a very, very insightful share. And just going back to the fact that you're talking about that Avram didn't make her feel that worthiness, and that there's so much of almost like a limitation that was placed and indicative of her self-doubt, right?
Yes.
But you're saying that it is a mutual responsibility. And a lot of times I've heard, there behind a great man, there's a great woman, right? So there's always that. And so there's so much of a responsibility that's also placed on the woman of maintaining that, the marriage, the responsibility, and also having her worthiness. So my question is, we heard so much about Abraham, what he, didn't do for Sarah, but what did Sarah do? What didn't Sarah do, I guess, for Abraham?
Oh, great question.
Does that
Thank
make
you.
question? Yeah.
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Jessica. I'm sure that there's more that I need to understand. I'm sorry, I do not know what's happening with my father's class. I recommend that you try, because I don't have an answer. So the answer that I came up with so far, Jessica, is when she says in the altercation, so to speak, the argument that she and Avraham have regarding Hagar, she is upset that Avraham did not stand up for her, but she doesn't just say, look, I'm upset that you didn't stand up for me. She says, HaShem should judge between me and between you. So instead of figuring out a way to use her complaint as, how can we get closer based on what I feel I need from you, she used it as a wedge. HaShem should judge between me and between you. I think that was a huge mistake. I'm not saying that there isn't more. Abraham's response was, look, do whatever you want with your maidservant, but we know that the consequences ultimately of Hagar and Sarah are very difficult, because we have the whole story with Yishmael also that unfolds in this parsha, and of course we have the whole history that came later. So I have a suspicion it has a lot to do with that.
So it's almost like she created, based on frustration, right? And I think it's based on resentment that she created the distance. And then it's very hard to, like you saying, wedge that distance. So because she didn't wedge that distance, she's being punished to a certain degree.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, they're both not really showing up as partners, and the real definition of a marriage is where everybody's looking not to blame the other, but to take the responsibility that they need to take.
Right. It's very hard to come back. What is it, like 70 years later or something like that, that they're trying to now wedge this distance between him and Sarah? I mean, it's significant time.
15 years later, assuming that nothing else happened in between. Yes.
Wow. So the next class will be part 2 of how to make the wedge go away. How to change that distance.
No, that's a good idea. We'll have to see.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Rabbi Chiel, you have a question?
Yes, I'm not sure if I'm going to be complimenting or arguing a bit, but no, I just the comment I'm going to make, I'm not sure if it's a compliment or a argument. One of the differences, major differences, your father, as you know, this week is a signature shir, the Chesed of Avram versus the Chesed of Lot. And after, I've learned that shir many, many, many times, and I noticed a few differences between Lot that your father did not mention in this year. And one of them is that Avram includes his entire family and everybody as well in the participation in the act of chesed. You look at and besides the fact that he hurries, there's a couple of three interesting points that, but
Sure.
Lot does everything himself, does not include anybody in it.
Beautiful.
So my question is, that complement what you were saying, that he was supposed to bring Sarah into it, or was it because the way it seems from the Psukim is that that's what Avram did all the time as his modus operandi of Chesed?
No, I totally agree. First of all, Hashem is ratifying that idea when he says "L'man asher yitzad es panav beso acharav," right? Because that is what he's doing, right? Like you just said, right? That's literally the sentence. Next two sentences after, it means that Hashem is acknowledging, giving him approbation for the fact that he instructs his family and his children after him. And yes, I do think that that's highly appropriate. It's great. I think the fact that he included Sarah in that is fantastic. And I think even the language of hurry Sarah is debatable, but I come out on the side of the positive, right? Usually you don't want to tell your wife, hurry up, right? Hurry up, the guests are here, right? But he's saying hurry because I think he's doing it as a way of saying, look, we're in this together. We want to do this quickly. Let's do this the best way we can. I'm hurrying, you hurry. This is going to be fantastic. Again, that point is a little bit debatable, but I do think that ultimately
he
did it as a self-transformation opportunity for himself and for Sarah, and that he is waiting for that. But at the same time, he should have addressed head on instead of just by kind of some actions that he's trying to partner with her. He should have said, this is amazing, what we can accomplish together. And I'm so inspired. Maybe this is a new lease on life, and maybe this is a new opportunity to have a child.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. I don't know if Dr. Finkelstein, if you're on, if you want to participate. I know you texted me that your head was spinning with ideas. If you can hear, great. And if not, then maybe we'll talk later this week. Thank you all so much. Have a super day, everyone. Dr. Rothman, we miss you when you're away. You got to know that.